Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Baggett. I'm here today representing the Alabama Historical Association. Before I retired 3 years ago, I was archivist at the Birmingham Public Library downtown. I think some of you have been there. And also I was archivist for the city of Birmingham. And now I'm managing the Historical Association Speakers Bureau. And I know you've had one or two of our speakers already, yeah. And so we appreciate your support. And I just did want to briefly try and sell you on the Alabama Historical Association. We are the largest and oldest historical group in the state of Alabama. Like your group, we're volunteer run. We have no paid employees. We host 2 events a year. We have in the fall what we call our fall pilgrimage, where we go somewhere in the state and see historic sites, hear talks on local history. This year we're going to Jasper, which has been a little bit of a hard sell, but we're expecting to have a great time in Jasper. Walker County's reputation, you know. And then our annual meeting is every April, and next year we'll be in Montgomery for our annual meeting, and that's a 3-day event where we have people give talks on Alabama history, we tour historic sites, we have a banquet, we have several awards that we present, we do that at the banquet. There's a couple of flyers back there on the table. If you're interested, I hope you'll pick one up. One is about membership in Alabama Historical Association, and the other is a flyer on our Speakers Bureau. So I'm sure you all belong to other organizations as well, and you know, we do these talks at museums and libraries, at historical societies, genealogical societies. We speak at retirement communities. We speak at continuing education programs like OLLI. We speak to groups like VAR, UDC, Civitan, Rotary. We go all over the state. So if you're part of another organization you think might have an interest, I hope you'll pick up a flyer or maybe take a few with you and share them with people that you think would have an interest. All right, the Milk Wars. About 4 a.m. on the morning of June 24th, 1931, Z.A. Goolsby was working at the gas station he managed on Montgomery Highway, 4 miles north of Prattville. 2 men in a green Chevrolet with the convertible top down drove in and inquired when the milk truck usually went by. Suspicious, Goolsby called the Autauga County Sheriff and then saw a truck owned by Foremost Dairies pass by carrying 2,000 gallons of raw milk bound for Birmingham. The men in the Chevrolet sped off in pursuit. They pulled alongside the truck, and one man hurled a flour sack filled with dynamite into the rear bed of the truck. As the truck driver, Jimmy Warren, sped up trying to outrun these guys, his unnamed companion climbed from the cab of the truck that's moving into the bed of the truck and threw the bomb out into a ditch where it exploded and left a significant crater in the ditch, but the men in the truck were safe. The sheriff arrived and gave chase, but the bomber's car was too fast and escaped. It was the second time this truck and this driver had been attacked. 3 weeks earlier, on June 2nd, men in a car threw a bomb onto the rear fender of the truck as the driver neared homeward. The explosion damaged the truck but did not injure the driver. After the second bombing, the sheriff's deputies between Montgomery and Birmingham began escorting milk trucks on the Montgomery Highway. The truck drivers altered their schedule to only travel in daylight, and the company hired an armed guard to follow the truck in an automobile. Alabama Governor Benjamin Miller offered a $200 reward for the information on the, quote, milk thugs who attacked the truck. In Birmingham, the The police added patrols to protect milk delivery men who were being threatened, and someone was putting trash into bottles of milk the delivery men left in front of stores and houses. All this violence was related to the price of milk, prompting one Alabama newspaper to declare, quote, "The milk war is on in Birmingham." So there were two issues here. The primary issue, and the reason what I just described and I'm about to describe happened, was over the price of milk. This was the Great Depression, and 2 or 3 pennies on a quart of milk was the difference for the farmers between making a profit and going out of business. And the other issue was that people's diet in the 1930s wasn't as varied as ours in today. They ate fewer things, and milk was a significant part of people's diets, especially children. And what started these attacks were responding to the fact that Barber's Dairy, which I'm sure some of you remember, I do, was bypassing the dairy farmers in Jefferson and St. Clair County and buying milk from Dallas County, where it's cheaper, and having it trucked up to Birmingham. So 2 years into the Great Depression, dairy farmers in the counties around Birmingham struggled to make a profit and considered raw milk brought into the area from South Alabama and Mississippi a threat to their survival. Trying to maintain peace between the farmers, the milk companies, and grocery stores, Dr. J.D. Dowling, Birmingham's chief health officer, held a conference of milk producers in his office in March 1931. The group agreed that milk in Birmingham would not be sold for less than 13 cents a quart. But the agreement did not hold, and by June, some stores were selling milk for as little as 9 cents a quart. These seemed to be small amounts, but for the farmers, a price difference of 2 or 3 cents was the difference between earning a profit and selling at a loss. The farmers complained to the press about competition that they considered unfair, asked Dr. Dowling to inspect milk trucks coming into Birmingham and block any containing South Alabama or Mississippi milk, something he could not do, and circulated a leaflet to try and convince every housewife that raw milk purchased directly from them was healthier than pasteurized milk from a store or delivered by a milkman. In the 1930s, milk price wars and milk war violence was not peculiar to Alabama. In other states, disputes over milk prices led to bombings, shootings, beatings, and the deliberate destruction of large quantities of raw milk. In 1930, a masked mob beat 4 employees of a pasteurization plant in Kansas City, Missouri, and dynamited the milking shed on a nearby farm. In Illinois, in 1931, arsonists burned a farmer's barn, killing 43 cows. In upstate New York, in 1933, local sheriffs asked the governor to declare martial law in response to gunfights and bomb plots around Rochester. Also in 1933, a months-long farmers' strike in Wisconsin led to battles between strikers and National Guardsmen, bombings, and at least 2 deaths. In Atlanta, Georgia, in 1934, a price war led to dynamite threats, the destruction of milk, and the bombing of a drugstore. One thing that would happen is the farmers, if they knew milk was being brought in from another place, they would wait for the trucks and force them over at gunpoint and then pour all that milk onto the ground. So milk wars were so much a part of Americans' consciousness in the 1930s that the conflicts made it into the movies. Actor James Cagney's 1935 film, The St. Louis Kid, tells the story of 2 truck drivers caught up in the violence, including a murder and kidnapping of a milk producer's strike. Back in Alabama, 2 weeks after the second truck bombing, the milk war turned deadly. This is the Sunshine Cleaners. This was the Pure Milk Company, which was owned by George Barber. These buildings, that building still exists. They're at 24th Street South and 7th Avenue in Birmingham. If you know where Hannah Antiques was, it's those buildings right along there. Shortly before 8:30 p.m. on July 10, 1931, 21-year-old Ada Lance, an employee of the Sunshine Cleaners on Birmingham's South Side, was looking at the front window of the cleaners while waiting for his shift to end. Lance and the approximately 100 other women who worked at the laundry and dry cleaners were preparing to go home when Lance saw a car stop in front of the Pure Milk Company next door. A man exited the car while the driver remained inside. The sun had gone down, but Lance was not looking out on the dark, deserted street. Other cars drove by with their headlights on. People were walking along the sidewalks. And across the street, a group of African-American kids was singing and clowning for change from passersby. The streetlights were bright enough that Lance saw the man's face, the color of his clothing, and that he was carrying a large package wrapped in brown paper. When the man threw the package through a plate glass window into the milk plant, Lance suspected it was a bomb. Bombings in Birmingham were very common, long before the Civil Rights Movement. And they usually related to labor strikes or situations like this, extortion, sometimes personal disputes. One case in the 1930s, a couple was divorcing and they were in a custody fight over the child, and for some reason the wife decided it would help her case if she dynamited the front porch of her husband's house. The heart wants what the heart wants. When the man threw the package through a plate glass window into the milk plant, Lance suspected it was a bomb. She shouted for her co-workers to move toward the back of the building and ran to the restroom to warn another co-worker who was there. Inside the milk plant, the package, which contained 25 sticks of dynamite, exploded. The blast blew out windows and doors and damaged large pieces of milk processing equipment. Debris was blown up and down the block, cars were damaged, and windows were shattered on both sides of the street. Outside on the sidewalk, one of the African-American children, 8-year-old Richard Richardson, was killed instantly. Ned Van Merkenstein, a 20-year-old white high school student, was seriously injured. What happened was, so these kids were outside. There was a group of young black kids, and then there was some white teenagers. And when they saw this man throw this thing through the window, break the window, being boys, two of them decided they would go check it out and see what he had done, because it didn't explode immediately. And so these two kids had walked over and were standing right outside that broken window when the bomb exploded. At least 20 other people inside the building, on the sidewalk, and in passing cars suffered injuries. Merkenstein's companion, high schooler Alex Borders, was knocked unconscious. When he awoke, laying in the middle of the street, he had so many cuts from flying glass that he required more than 100 stitches to his head and body. When Ada Lance emerged from the restroom with her co-worker, who had cuts on her back from flying glass, Lance was overwhelmed by ammonia gas that was escaping from the damaged milk processing equipment. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The man who had thrown the bomb, R.A. Bridges, and his driver, Bergen Gilpin, drove a few blocks to the nearest hospital, St. Vincent's. They went to the hospital to establish an alibi, but while there, they walked out onto the hospital's front porch and watched an ambulance deliver one of their injured victims. Bridges was cocky and certain he would not be caught, but the police had a head start. R.A. Bridges was 34 years old and lived in a rented room in Huffman. He was married, but his wife was living elsewhere, and he did not own a functioning automobile. An electrician, he had worked for Alabama Power Company, but more recently became an arsonist, setting houses and buildings alight for insurance money. Before the milk bombings, the Birmingham Police, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and a private investigator hired by an insurance company were investigating this string of arsons. Bridges had been arrested and released on bond in the burning of a house. Days before the bombing, a 21-year-old Birmingham man named Glenn Davis, who was in the city jail for allegedly stealing an automobile tire, told police that Bridges was planning, quote, something big, the bombing of a milk company. On the night of the bombing, Davis' mother, Lula Mae Davis, corroborated her son's statement. How the mother and son came to have this information is unclear, but Bridges, whose confidence far exceeded his skills as a criminal, had not kept his plan secret. He just told everybody he was going to blow this place up. In addition to Davis and his mother, a third informant from Birmingham's South Side, Jack Warren, gave police information on Bridges and his associates. Warren was known to the bombers and received threats. Someone left a note inside the screen door of his home that read, quote, "You have told too much already. Watch your step." The note was signed with a question mark. On the day after the bombing, police began picking up suspects and bringing them in for interrogation. First arrested was Eldridge McCord, a former Birmingham City firefighter who was already under indictment for participating in 2 armed robberies of Italian-owned cafes. McCord had also been the driver when the 2 milk trucks were bombed. Also arrested was Berg Gilpin, an auto mechanic, A.J.S. Tyler, a dairy farmer from neighboring St. Clair County, and R.A. Bridges. After a, quote, all-night grilling by detectives, Gilpin confessed to the police and told a newspaper reporter, "I drove the car the night of the Pure Milk bombing." McCord also confessed, and both men identified Bridges as the one who threw the bomb. Bridges, who shared his plan widely before the attack, refused to answer police questions. That is Mabel Klein. Police made more arrests in the next few days, including 2 women, Mabel Klein, a seller of real estate, and her daughter-in-law, Mildred Chambers, who lived with Klein along with Mildred's 9-month-old baby. The women were associates of Bridges, and Klein knew several dairy farmers. On July 22nd, less than 2 weeks after the bombing, the grand jury convened and heard testimony from 15 witnesses, including Ada Lance. The jury indicted Bridges, Gilpin, Klein, Chambers, and McCord for murder in the deaths of Ned Van Merkenstein and Richard Richardson. Bridges was tried first on October 3, 1931, just 3 weeks after the bombing. The courtroom and hallway were packed with spectators. While waiting for court to open on the first day of his trial, Bridges sat at the defendant's table eating a sandwich and drinking a bottle of milk. Apparently trying to appear menacing or mysterious, Bridges wore a dark pair of sunglasses throughout the trial. He seems to have enjoyed playing the role of a chatty but cold-blooded killer for the public and the press. Bridges was tried for the murder of the white teenager, Ned Van Merkenstein, but not for the murder of the black child, Richard Richardson. None of the defendants will be tried for Richardson's death. Bergen Gilpin, who drove a car on the night of the bombing, cooperated with the prosecution and described his and Bridges' movements before and after the attack. Bridges told Gilpin that he was being paid $100 for the bombing, and he would share $30 with Gilpin. Bridges did not identify the source of the money. With the help of Gilpin and other witnesses, police pieced together the events of the night of the bombing. On the afternoon of July 10, Gilpin drove Bridges to a Huffman farm where Bridges had stored 2 cases of dynamite in an outbuilding. Bridges retrieved 1 case, and then the men drove to the Huffman home of Mabel Klein. Klein's daughter-in-law and baby were also in the house. Eldridge McCord, the former firefighter and cafe robber, was at the house as well. He had come to supply one of the cars for the night. Bridges took the case of dynamite into the kitchen, and as Gilpin watched, opened it with an axe and counted out 25 sticks of dynamite. He laid the dynamite on the kitchen floor, and then Bridges, Gilpin, the 2 women, and the baby sat down at the kitchen table and ate dinner. After the meal, Gilpin helped Bridges tie the sticks of dynamite together, insert 2 blasting caps, and attach a fuse. They added a brick to help break the glass window of the milk plant and wrapped the bomb in paper, leaving the end of the fuse exposed. Leaving the house with the bomb and heading west into Birmingham, Bridges drove McCord's car with McCord, Chambers, and her baby as a passenger. The baby was in the car with the bomb. These are not sophisticated criminals. Gilpin drove a second car with Klein as a passenger. Arriving at Birmingham South Side, Bridges dropped McCord off at a pool hall so he could be seen and establish an alibi. Gilpin joined Bridges in McCord's car, and the two women and baby drove away in the other. With Gilpin driving, the men turned onto 2nd Avenue South, and Bridges pointed out the Pure Milk Company, saying, "There's the place. Drive up to the curb." Gilpin missed the stop and circled the block. Seeing so many people about, Gilpin told Bridges, quote, "I don't want to do this. We might hurt somebody." Bridges said, "I made a flash with one or two jobs," referring to the truck bombings. "I'm going to blow this place all to hell." Bridges then grabbed the steering wheel and forced the car to the curb. He lit the fuse on the bomb, climbed from the car, and tossed the package through the window. He hurried back to the car, and Gilpin drove away. After driving a few blocks, the men heard the bomb explode. "There goes the damn thing," Bridges told his accomplice. They then drove to St. Vincent's Hospital and went to the sick room of J.B. Fuqua, a dairy farmer who was recuperating from a gunshot wound. Mabel Klein, Mildred Chambers, and the baby were already there. This was to be everybody's alibi, that they were visiting Fuqua at the time of the bombing. Later that night, Gilpin and the women returned to Klein's house. Bridges came later, carrying an early edition of a Birmingham newspaper. He read the account of the bombing aloud to his co-conspirators, and this was when they learned that a child had been killed. "Keep your mouth shut," Bridges told the group. "I threw the bomb." Bridges was found guilty of the bombing and sentenced to life in prison. Gilpin, who cooperated with authorities and testified against Bridges, also received a life sentence, but he would be paroled in 1941. Bridges appealed his conviction and won a second trial, scheduled for October 3rd, 1932, exactly 30 years to the day before the day I was born. Ada Lance, the woman who saw Bridges toss the bomb into the milk plant, was scheduled to testify again and became a target of threats. On Sunday, August 7, Lance received a note warning her to, quote, "get out of town until after the trial." The following evening, two men knocked on the door of the house Lance shared with her steelworker husband, Clarence. When Ada answered the door, the men offered her money to, quote, "take a 6-month vacation trip out of town." When Lance refused, the men became belligerent and told her to, quote, "get out of town or we will run you out." As the men left, she noticed a car parked a block away. Lance saw the car again 1 week later. On Monday evening, August 15, as she was driving home west of Birmingham near the town of Fairfield, the car followed her for a distance, then sped up, and the driver tried to force her off the road. Lance sped up and the car chased her before one of the men fired 2 shots from a pistol at Lance's car, then drove away. One bullet was found lodged in the back of the driver's seat, missing Ada Lance by inches. The next afternoon, Tuesday, Lance was driving home near the spot of the first shooting when the 2 men drove up behind her car and fired on her again. Following the second attack, Sheriff Milton McDuff put Lance in protective custody until the trial. Her attackers were never identified. Bridges was convicted a second time, but this time only sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mabel Klein was tried for manslaughter for her role in the bombing. She was convicted, but like Bridges, appealed and won a second trial, which ended in a hung jury. At the request of Ned Van Merkenstein's mother, who had testified at all of the trials, the charges were dropped, and Klein went free. Her daughter-in-law, Mildred Chambers, spent time in the county jail awaiting trial, but charges against her were also dropped. Eldridge McCord was convicted in Autauga County for his part in the second truck bombing. He never received the payment he was promised for his part in the crime, but he did serve 3 years in prison before being paroled. Bridges was never tried for the truck bombings. Following Bridges' second conviction, he was moved to Spangler State Prison in Elmore County and assigned to work as an assistant to the electrician in the prison's cotton mill. In September 1936, Bridges walked away from Spangler during a prison baseball game. He met up with Clarence Higginbotham, a former semi-professional baseball player and fellow escapee from Spangler. If you look at the newspapers, people were escaping from this place like every 2 weeks. The security was clearly not tight. The 2-month manhunt ended on December 10 when Bridges was found shot to death on the side of a road near West Point, Georgia. Authorities speculated that the two men had, quote, fallen out for some reason. Bridges' mother, who lived nearby in LaGrange, Georgia, claimed the body. Exactly who were the, quote, higher-ups behind the 1939 milk war remains unresolved. In January 1932, Birmingham Police Chief McDuff presented evidence against 8 unnamed individuals he believed were involved, but the grand jury declined to issue any indictments. So we do not know who hired Bridges. 2 men followed Bridges and Gilpin in a separate car on the night of the bombing, a car that contained 2 machine guns and more dynamite. These men were not identified. While Bridges and his closest accomplices were in jail, someone was still on the outside, intimidating witnesses, and someone paid for Bridges' extra perks in jail while he awaited trial, including a radio and meals delivered to him daily at a cost of $70 per month. These people were not identified. Mabel Klein named several dairy farmers she claimed were involved in the plot. They denied involvement, and none of them were prosecuted. And with the murder of R.A. Bridges, authorities seem to have considered the case closed. So this is the site today. This was the part of the Pure Milk Company, and then over here, that was Sunshine Cleaners. It's now, it's a bakery now. And you see there's a gap between the buildings, that's a parking lot. Most of Sunshine Cleaners building is actually in that gap. That building's been torn down. Are there questions?
Yeah, what dates was the milk war localized by?
3031 here.
Okay. Now, Trustful had many dairies down Highway 11. I just didn't know I was just wondering how, like, outliers like us and outside of Birmingham would have been affected by that.
Well, they were the ones selling milk. So Barber, most of the Birmingham milk producers bought their milk from dairies in Jefferson and Shelby and St. Clair County. So that was ultimately the issue here, is when Barber started buying milk from Dallas County, he was undercutting the dairy farmers here. And that's what led to the bombing of the trucks. That's what led to the violence.
Right. My grandfather had a dairy probably closer to Fargo, maybe.
He probably didn't do it.
Yeah. But I sometimes wonder why maybe that's when he got out of the dairy.
Well, you know, there were, I mean, as I said, there were clearly several dairy farmers involved in this and were funding it, but, you know, nothing.
I've seen a reference or two to blockades.
Yeah.
Even as far out as here.
Yeah, this was a common thing all over the country at this time. You know, I was researching something else a few years ago, and I stumbled across this, and I kept seeing bombings, and they kept talking about the milk war, and I was like, what is a milk war? Yeah, because I'd never heard of this.
I first thought, well, maybe it's a price war.
Yeah, and it was. Yeah, it was a price war, but an especially nasty one. Yeah.
You kind of just answered it, but that's what I was going to ask, was how you kind of stumbled upon this one and the rabbit hole that ensued. Just kind of take me through that.
Well, another book I'm working on, for that, one of the things I'm doing is researching bombings in Birmingham. And of course, you know, we know that there were about 48 racially motivated bombings between 1947 and 1965. But what I'm finding is there were even more non-racial bombings in Birmingham, going back to at least the 1890s. And as I said, they related often to labor disputes. You know, when somebody went on strike, stuff would start blowing up. But also organized crime, because the same night that the Pure Milk Company was bombed, a barbershop in Wylam was bombed. Totally unrelated, but they were fighting there over the price of haircuts. All the local barbers there had agreed to charge a certain price, and then one guy was undercutting them, and they threatened him, and he wouldn't raise his prices. They blew up his barbershop. And you know, the thing about, and bombings were not unusual in industrial cities like Birmingham. They didn't just happen here. They happened in Chicago, Pittsburgh, they happened in a lot of places. And a big part of the reason for that was in an industrial area where there's mining and so forth, there's lots of dynamite that even if you can't legally buy it, you could steal it pretty easily. And a lot of men who, you know, worked for these companies were trained on how to use dynamite. So they knew how to use it.
Had access.
Yeah, they had access and they had the skill to do it. So, you know, it was common in mining areas and industrial areas when there were disputes of various kinds, stuff would just start blowing up. It was very common. Yes, ma'am.
Then I heard the topic that you want to do. I was going to get a head start, and I looked it up online. But what you spoke about was totally different than what I was expecting.
Yeah, yeah.
I was expecting talking about the raw milk that was being sold.
Which is an issue now. Nobody's bombing anybody yet, but yeah, it's interesting how things like this circle back around, you know, because we're arguing over raw milk again now. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I teach at the high school, and the way you open your talk, just what I was like, man, it sounds like an action movie. It seems like an opening of action. But I like to do in my classroom, like little literature activities and breakout rooms and things like that. What are you reading? Did you write that, or are you reading excerpts from something? Like, if I wanted to create this into a thing to introduce the Great Depression, or if I wanted to partner with an economics teacher on price floors and things like that, where can I get what you use?
Well, I wrote this. I actually wrote this a few years ago as an article, and then I turned it into a talk. I'd be happy to send you this text. And I can send you references. What I used were newspapers and grand jury reports. And the grand jury reports are available at the archives downtown. The newspapers, if you haven't discovered it, you should. Newspapers.com. It's so good. Now, you will go down rabbit holes, you know, but, you know, they've digitized tens of thousands of newspapers from all of the United States and other countries, and it's word searchable. So you can put in Milk War, and it would, you know, it'll bring up articles, and you can specify a particular day or a time period. So that's where I found most of the newspaper coverage on this, was using newspapers.
That was my next question. Is it digitized somewhere?
Yeah. So if you want to take one of those flyers with you, my email address is on there, and just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send you this text. Yeah, that would be a fun thing for kids, I guess.
Yeah, no, I love it.
It's weird. It's really weird, yeah. Yeah, you know, you talk about it sound like an action movie, and it does, especially that second truck bombing down at Prattville. You know, there was the driver, and he had another guy in the cab with him, and while they're
He gets out.
running down, you know, while they're driving down the highway being chased by these guys, his companion climbs out the window of the cab, climbs around, and it's like something, it's like something Sylvester Stallone would do, you know, climbs into the bed of the truck and throws the bomb out before it goes off. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Yeah, yeah. Or the old westerns where they would fight on top of the train, you know, yeah, it sounds like something like that. Other questions? All right, well, thank you all. I've enjoyed this. Thank you for coming this morning. And if you're interested in more information on the Speakers Bureau or the Historical Association, please grab some flyers back there. Thank you all.